Hello, everybody. This is Lee Cole 3 with my partner, James Proctor. I'd like to say hello to you. And today we
Hi.
have a gentleman on here who is going to give us a lot of good stuff. His name is Mathew Murray. And Mathew, I appreciate you coming on this show. I know that you and James have been behind the scenes working on it.
For a
And
while.
thank you so
Mhm.
much. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And I'm just going to get right into it. The number one the number one thing now driving this is you have all these rat podcasts that come on here. And what do you think when you see people like Sammy Gravano on here changing the history of the mafia?
Well, what they're doing, one and all, is what they have always done, and that is to exercise manipulation. Let's take Sammy the Bull. I've got nothing against Sammy the Bull personally. I actually know him, and I've talked to him many times prior to his becoming a cooperator. He was quite a aggressive individual before he
Yes.
became a cooperator, and he still is. But you see, with most of these informants, many of them started out in the street bullying people and manipulating people. And then, as they grew older, they manipulated organized crime. And then, when they were under arrest and facing 50 years or life, then they manipulated the federal government to allow them to enter the cooperation program and to allow them to escape punishment for all of their dastardly crimes. And so now, once they've avoided jail, it's not so amazing to see them manipulating the public through the podcast system and trying to make money. And that's
Yes.
the name of their game. All of these guys, these informants, wanted to make money, want to make money, are making money, and they pull the wool over everyone's eyes from beginning to end.
Yeah. And you know what's interesting about that is that for me, what bothers me most about it is that Sammy Gravano, for example, he has killed he or been involved in 19 murders, and so he's got the podcast. He's making, you know, 10,000 or more a month in money, and the thing that really bothers me is what he says about his victims, and so he continues to go after his victims, and the problem with that is that these families, there's families, they're still alive. They miss their loved ones, and he just will continue to go after them. And so he's wanting to rewrite history into what he wants people to think. And unfortunately, you have a new generation of people that don't know what really happened back in the 80s and 90s. It's just, to me, disgusting to see him, for example, doing that. But most of the informants are doing that.
It's kind of amazing because at the present time, with my colleague Anthony DiPietro, uh,
Yes.
Anthony's a great post conviction lawyer who does
Yes.
a lot of work trying to get compassionate release for people, among many other things. And we're trying to get so many guys who are dying in jail. They're old.
Hmm.
Like Vic Amuso is 88 years old. He's done 30 years. He's done 30 years already. He's sick.
Yeah.
He's in a wheelchair. He wants to go home to die. All right. That's just one example
Yes.
of many cases that we have going. And the government responds, oh, no, he's killed too many people. No, we can't allow him out. But yet they'll allow anybody who
Hmm.
cooperates. They'll let them
Yes.
out the door, not when they're old and gray and in a wheelchair, but they let them out the door, and they don't tell you, James Proctor or Lee Cole, this guy's living next year. He's got a different
Hmm.
name. He's supposedly some kind of working guy, but he's really a criminal. And they don't let
Hmm.
you know that, and they don't care. The government of the United States does not care about that. Okay, they don't care about the victims either. Only in
No.
when we defense lawyers are trying to get some old man out who can't even move, then they say, "Oh, he killed too many people." But when they let the rats out, No problem. There's no
Yeah.
problem.
And that's somewhere that's a very good thing you just said, because I was thinking about that. You got a guy like Sammy Gravano who says he only pulled the trigger once. That's probably not true. And then he attacks. He was involved with the murder of a 16-year-old boy, and he gave when he originally did his first confession to the FBI, it changed over time, and now he does video attacking the kid, lying about the kid. And so people listen to him. They believe this.
Yeah.
And that's the sad thing, Matthew, that they believe what this guy is saying. He said this kid was a drug addict. He was killed. There was no drugs in his body. He had a bullet running away. Sammy said that the guy who ran toward him tried to pull the gun out of the hand. He blames it on Louis Melito, even though originally he said he killed the kid. So,
well, Sammy is entertaining because he has his delivery has the ring of truth. You know, you just look at him and he's a crusty old man now. And, you know, he seems, I'll tell you one thing about Sammy. He doesn't try to portray himself as not being a rat. I mean, he calls himself a rat. And I got to give him a lot of credit for that. So, but many of these other informants turned podcasters, they tell these stories that are so far-fetched. You know, there's one guy, I don't want to start mentioning their names, but, you know, you've got guys telling stories about things that happened when they were 7 years old. And they say, well, someone else told me. Well, why did someone else tell you? Well, because I was a member of the family and they have to tell me everything. No, they don't. They don't have to. They're not supposed to tell you anything. And, you know, when I look at people sending these podcasts and I say to myself, oh, my God, how could the public believe this? And yet they do. And who could blame them? Because that's why my podcast was so unique. I'm the only, you're never going to get people who are accused of being active members of organized crime to go on a podcast. They're not going on podcasts.
Nope.
They're not going to do interviews. All right. So I'm the closest thing that you're ever going to get to being on that side and trying to defend against the government and what they do that's so wrong. And it not only hurts the individuals they're prosecuting and their families, but it hurts the entire criminal justice system. It destroys the integrity of the justice system. And if the justice system doesn't have integrity, you've got nothing.
Very true.
And, you know, I'm going to change it. You actually were a lawyer for a very interesting guy. A lot of people call him a serial killer. I would like you to tell us your opinion of Tommy Patera and your defense, because they wanted to put him to death and you defended him. What is your opinion of Tommy Patera?
Well, you know, Tommy's trial stands for itself, whatever that is. He's still trying to overturn his case every day. And let me tell you, he's got some good legal issues, which I'm not going to get into. I'm not handling his case, but I don't want to get into that kind of storytelling. But Tommy's someone that I knew prior to him ever being arrested. He was never arrested even once prior to his case, which was a massive, you know, multi-murder narcotics conspiracy. And, you know, Tommy was a guy who was very respectful, ultra respectful. I was just telling the story again last night to some friends about how Tommy came to my house one day when he was being investigated. And to make a long story short, that story is that my daughter, who was about 2 years old, was there, and I needed to go to the post office, and I had to pick up something in person, and I asked Tommy to babysit for me. So, you know, I trusted Tommy so much. I trusted him with my little daughter, and to me, he was a personal friend. He was a good guy. He was always respectful. Now, of course, you know, Tommy is a legend, and the legend is that he's the type of guy that, you know, if you crossed him, you're gonna pay for it. But when he was on trial in the death penalty phase of his trial, Rena Raji, who's a very tough judge, she is so tough you can't believe it, and I don't think she had a sweet spot for Tommy at all. But she did say to the jury, and I think this was crucial in the jury deciding not to impose the death penalty. Judge Rena Raji said to the jury, you are allowed to consider that the people who Tommy has been convicted of killing were not a bunch of first graders. And indeed, the people he was accused of killing are people who are very dangerous individuals. And I'm not saying Tommy is guilty, and I'm not saying he was right. If he were guilty, he says he's innocent. But there's another side to Tommy, a good side to Tommy. He's no kind of psycho. He's not the kind of guy that if you step on his shoe, he's going to cut your leg off. No, in fact, he's the opposite. And he's respectful and he's intelligent. And, it's just too bad. I think Tommy was in Japan at one point, and he was working for the Army. He wasn't in the Army, but he was working for them, teaching the Army personnel the martial arts.
Yes.
I wish that Tommy would have joined the Army, because he would have made an excellent commando. In fact, one time he suggested that I propose to the government while this case was on. The United States was looking for Saddam Hussein. They were looking for him. He couldn't be found. And Tommy said, "Hey, I want to make a deal with the government. Let them drop me over enemy lines. Give me a couple of some equipment and give me the best information they have, and I'll get this guy, and we'll all even, and I'll disappear into the sunset." That was a real proposition. I made it to the government, and they refused. But that's the kind of guy Tommy was. He's also patriotic. So,
yes,
like I say, I like to give people, including you, another viewpoint on some of these guys. Like, it's always easy to say, "Oh, Tommy is a serial killer. Yeah, he's a nut." He wasn't a nut, and he wasn't a serial killer either.
Yeah.
Hey, James?
Yeah, and so it kind of in this thing with talking about social media and the legal system. One of the things that we're seeing now, I think maybe some of the judges are starting to take at least some interest in it, because what you're seeing is like Stephen Crea, for example. He's the courts are looking at maybe doing a retrial or an appeal, and a lot of that's based upon a podcaster named Panisi that has been saying stuff that's different now about that case on Stephen Crea. And so the courts are saying, hey, this is evidence that should have been considered. And it was about the reason that he flipped. And so you're seeing that. And then you also have the case that just recently, there was the case with Bassiano, Vincent Bassiano. And so what he's doing is he was, taped by the boss of the family, Bonanno crime family, Joe Messino, while in the recreational yard of the jail. And so they're saying that basically he was coerced into making statements to that boss. And so they are also looking at doing a possible retrial. And he's been denied a couple of times, but now the judge is actually going to look at it. So what's your thoughts on what's happening now based on like the new evidence or things that are happening?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts on those subjects. First of all, Anthony DiPietro, who I mentioned before, who's my colleague. He does all my legal research and writing for me, and appeals and stuff. He and I are working on Vincent Bassiano for over 10 years now.
Wow.
And it's taken 10 years to get the judge to get to the point of saying that he wants to hear about all this. Now, that's kind of amazing. For someone to be in jail for 10 years. Vincent Bassiano spent 11 straight years in solitary confinement. All right. At the end,
and he was at ADX as well.
He did it at the MCC in Manhattan, and then over in Florence, Colorado. And he spent 11 years not contacting any other prisoners, just being alone in a cell with an hour out in the fresh air every day. Vincent Bastiano could be out of jail any day, and he could have been out of jail the first day if he would become a government informant. That's what they told him, and it's all that simple. Be a government informant and you walk out of here. And he said no. And Joe Massino said yes. And so Joe Massino, who now admits to 13 murders, now that he's cooperating with the government, he testifies against Bastiano, who's allegedly trying to help him out. It's bizarre. And the government sends Massino into a room with Vincent Bastiano. Massino is bugged, all right, by the government, trying to lead Bastiano into a conversation. And at that time, the government says, not Matthew Mary, not Anthony DiPietro, not Vincent Bastiano, we don't say it. The government says that Joe Massino was the boss of what they call the Bonanno family. And he's the boss. And he tells Bastiano, I'm asking you a question. Do you understand that? I want an answer. Okay. Now you tell me that's not coercion. And wait, all these years? And these motions weren't made yesterday. These motions were made years ago. But, we're not complaining, because if the judge in the case is finally willing to blow this out at a hearing, I don't see how he can refuse to give Vinny Bastiano a new trial, all right, without the Massino stuff in there, that coercion by the boss of the family. They say he's the boss. He says he's the boss. He says he orders the guy to give him an answer, and now they get to use that. He's a government informant, wired up by the government. So, I know a lot about that case. You mentioned Steve Crea. I was not on that case, but my friend Anthony, again, he was on that case. And, I am told, I know a lot about that because I represented a co-defendant on the case earlier. And my client was out early in the case. He got a great deal. And the rest of them wound up with life without parole. My client got 18 months. But anyhow, it was a stupid case from the beginning. These people had nothing to do with this case. It was bizarre in my mind that the government wanted to accuse the so-called the upper echelon of the Lucchese family. Oh, they killed this guy, Michael Meldish. First of all the evidence points elsewhere. How he got killed elsewhere. And I'm not going to go there. But I'm going to tell you that this John Panisi, he's the guy I was talking about before. When I said, he knows things. He knows things that happened when he was 7 years old. How does he know? Johnny Sideburns told me. What? Johnny Sideburns told him nothing. I don't believe a word he says. This guy actually says that he speaks to ghosts, to dead people, to get advice. Okay? And now that's a credible person. This is what the government relies on. This young man, who knows nothing about the whole scheme of things. He might know what he knows, what he did. No question about that. But he don't know the history of organized crime and all that. And yet the government portrays him as this guy knows everything. It's just not right. And that's what they do, case after case after case.
And he wasn't even on the radar either.
And with Panisi, the problem with Panisi is that from what it looks like, is he didn't even have to go in to testify. He just chose to become an informant. Yeah.
Who knows why that went on? He didn't have a case. You can't figure out the mindset of some of these guys. Maybe he just was scared. Maybe, I can't speculate and be correct, but I could think that maybe he did something wrong and he was worried about something happening to him and he jumped the gun.
Yes.
Literally.
Yeah. And then kind of related to that is one other case that kind of talks about how the government just will go to any extreme to be able to get someone convicted. So if we had 9/11, right? And so supposedly the attention was going to be on all of these terrorists and everything. But for nearly 10 years, you have John Gotti Jr., that goes through 5 trials. They would not stop going after him. They finally did. And then they have people like a guy named, John Light, that made up a lot of stories and was the least credible witness, according to the jurors. And what do you think about that trial with the 5 trials with John Gotti Jr.? I think it's just because of the name, and also the government supposedly put him through diesel therapy. He was, what he went through, to me, was stuff that even a lot of these terrorists that they would bring in didn't have to go through. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on Gotti Jr.
My thoughts about John Gotti Jr.'s cases are that I don't think he would even be indicted on any of them if he were not John Gotti Jr. And like his dad before him, when the government failed to convict him at trial, do you think that they would say, okay, we've got egg on our face, this is not a good case? Years ago, when I first started as a criminal defense lawyer back in 1976, the government wouldn't bring a case. No federal case would go forward unless they had you 10 times the amount they need to convict you. And today, they just go after people because they could get away with it. And they say, let's try it. Let's see. But they resented the fact that John Gotti Jr. was out there on the street, and they believed that he had taken his dad's place, and they were going to show him, and they were going to show his dad while his dad was alive, we're going to crush you. We're going to crush you. This is war, okay? And if a guy, you can't convict a guy. The federal government convicts everybody, like 98% of the time. If you couldn't convict John Gotti on the first time, why do you go a second time and a third and a fourth time? My goodness gracious, what is this justice system about? If you're going to take somebody and keep trying them in a kangaroo court, and believe me, federal court is very close to that. You're going to keep trying them in a court where 98% of the time the defendants lose, and this guy, he's got to basically win 4 times.
And let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about that. Now, the first thing you'll hear about Jon Jr. is, he did a 302, but there's no evidence that 302 ever came to anything. Do you think that it got to the point where he just was basically being tortured by the government?
Yeah, I think that they put him in a position where maybe he could have gotten hurt for no good reason. And it's all, I believe the government's behind all that stuff, about leaking. They're experts at leaking things. They just leak all over the place. And it's amazing that they have no respect for human life even. Talk about the mob. Oh, yeah, they killed this one and that one. The government doesn't care if you get killed or not. The whole situation with the partnership between Greg Scarpa and Agent DeVecchio, that's beyond belief. But it was going on for years and years and years.
30 years, 3 decades.
Yeah.
And why do you think that this guy DeVecchio, he goes on trial and he's found innocent, basically, even though the evidence is that he was so guilty?
When first of all, his trial was in state court, not in federal court. So in state court, any defendant has a chance to win. In federal court, not so. In federal court, you have a very slim chance of winning anything unless the government steps on its own toes and does something wrong during the course of the trial. But there was a lot of pressure to help DeVecchio, and the FBI agents certainly came together to try to help him get him off. And who can say why that occurred? But there's quite a substantial amount of evidence to say that Scarpa was a government informant way before Joe Valachi, way before that.
Oh yeah.
1956, he was a government informant, and he still maintained a criminal career out on the street, which includes violence and murder and every damn thing. So, you figure it out. I can't.
Do you think that we still are the difference in the United States and say Canada? In Canada right now, you have a mob war going on with the Rizzuto family, and pretty much they're still in the middle of this war. Do you think the fact that they don't have a RICO law up there is why this is so out in the open? And here it's like the mob is kind of went into hiding here because of RICO.
Canada is a strange place. Of course, I've never tried a case in Canada, but I've had clients who have been arrested in Canada, people I've known from, the United States, and they've been arrested up there. Their justice system is very much different than ours. Their concerns are very much different than ours. In the United States, this whole thing about organized crime has become a bugaboo, and it's taken on a life of its own. Back in the days of Lyndon Johnson, there was a presidential commission formed. And one of the conclusions of the presidential commission, I think it was 1964 or 67, not quite sure. One of the conclusions was that the government of the United States had to obliterate organized crime at all costs. Okay. And that became the mantra of the Justice Department and the FBI. We are going to eliminate organized crime in the United States at all costs. What does that mean? The cost of it was their own integrity. The cost of it was the prostitution of the entire federal criminal justice system, so that it's not only people they accuse of being in organized crime who get railroaded today, it's people in every walk of life, including the politicians themselves.
Yes.
And it's funny you said that, because I'm going to bring up you consider yourself a New Yorker, is that right?
Yes, I am. I was born in Manhattan, and I moved to Brooklyn about 30 years ago.
Well, I'm going to bring up a case that is dumbfounding, and you can give me your opinion on it, and you can tell me what you think is going to happen. And I'm talking about Jordan and Nelly. And now here you got a military man who has no criminal record, has been pretty much a good citizen his whole life. There were 2 murders within a couple-week period. One guy gets off, and now you got Nelly, and they're making an example of a guy that has shown nothing but love for his country. Why do you think this is?
Well, we live in a woke world right now, and I don't know if we're ever going to unwoke and get back to the regular America that we've all known and loved and grew up in. But right now, everything's upside down and inside out. And the proof of the pudding on this particular incident is that, my adversaries in court are not only the FBI, but the police. I handle many street crime cases. I take these court-appointed assignments, in state court, and I see everything that happens on the street, the subway crime and all the rest of it. And the police themselves let this guy go. They let him go. What does that tell you? It tells you these are law enforcement people, and they were embarrassed to arrest him. And yet, once the political sector goes into the court sector, then you're mixing horse bleep with ice cream. Okay?
Yeah.
Because when you start to mix politics in the criminal justice system, now you've got just nothing but a bowl of what.
Yeah.
It stinks from the high heavens. No, this guy shouldn't have been arrested. And I'm glad that a couple of weeks later, the man happened to be black, who did almost the same thing, but he stabbed the guy to death, and defending himself and his girlfriend. And thank God that he was black. They were afraid to try to railroad him
Right.
on the case of self-defense. So the case you're talking about is clearly a case of self-defense. This young man is going to have to go to trial. And, what's amazing is that the theory of the prosecution is that because he's a military man, that's what made him dangerous. Oh my God. How low can we go? How low can we go?
Exactly.
And do you find that when these people are convicted, or they try to convict them, they bring them to trial, a lot of people just don't understand that what the government's also doing is destroying their lives financially.
Yeah, sure.
And that's probably the biggest crime going on, that they'll find, like with Trump, he's financially being wiped out right now.
Yeah, for sure. And there's the cost of going to trial is so prohibitive. Like, unless you have a court-appointed lawyer, or if this is a public case, like you could start a GoFundMe page, okay, like the gentleman was speaking of. I think he started a GoFundMe page.
Yeah.
And he's got plenty of ammunition there to help defend himself. But most people can't afford to defend themselves through a trial, especially a federal trial. Let me tell you something. It's you, as a lawyer, sometimes I wonder not only about my fee, I wonder about how is my client going to be able to hire investigators? How is he going to hire experts that he needs to fight back against the government? The government has unlimited resources.
Yes, they do.
And you'll find Donald Trump has good quality lawyers, and people will say, well, why did you get rid of this guy?
Yeah.
Because you're talking a lot of money.
Well, Trump is a strange man, and, it's hard to figure out sometimes how he manages his personnel. It is kind of you do see people come and go rather quickly. So, that's part of his own personality and part of his life. I guess he has found success in acting that way. Just keep changing people around and keep everyone on their toes, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. James?
Hey, Lee, could we go to a topic of, I was going to kind of start early in the career of Mathew. Is that okay? Or
take it where you want, of course.
Okay. So we've talked about some of the cases, and then there's some more definitely I want to talk about. But one of the things, Mathew, I have a lot of respect for you. You obviously, if people don't know, you've been involved in as a defense attorney since 1976. You got your JD at New York University Law School, which that's the top in U.S. News report. And for 2023 and 2024, it's the 5th ranked law school in the U.S., but it's the top law school for criminal law, tax law, and for international law. And so, I know that you went to Fordham University, you got your bachelor's degree in political science and history in 1972. So, you really have superior education. And so what I'd like to do is talk about when you were a kid. So would you be willing to discuss growing up on Mulberry Street as a kid, and maybe touch on what made you decide to go into law, and then how did you get involved with representing clients accused of being involved in organized crime?
Well, I was born in 1950 at, of course, Manhattan General Hospital on 17th Street and 2nd Avenue. But my first residence, when I went home from the hospital, I lived on top of Angelo's restaurant in the center of Little Italy. All right.
Wow.
And Angelo's restaurant is on Mulberry Street and off between Grand and Hester. And I lived there until I was about 6 years old. And then I moved to a place about a mile away, Lower East Side. It's a place called Knickerbocker Village.
Yes.
And Knickerbocker Village was a wonderful place to grow up. 1,600 families in apartments. It was a private project. It wasn't a city project. And a lot of interesting characters came out of Knickerbocker Village, as you may know, not know. I once, as a lawyer, I would tell the judges, I'd like you to give special consideration to my client. He's a friend of mine from from Knickerbocker Village. We grew up together. And the judges would say, what is this Knickerbocker Village? Is this some kind of crime college?
Oh,
And
God.
but Knickerbocker Village was a place where many, many distinguished politicians grew up, and many doctors and many lawyers and many famous politicians. Al Smith, who ran for president in 1928, came from that neighborhood, my neighborhood. We called it the Fourth Ward. So I grew up in that environment and went to St. Joseph School, but then I went to the most important educational experience in my life was going to Xavier High School, okay? And Xavier High School was on 30 West 16th Street. It's a Catholic high school. It's a Jesuit high school. It's a military high school. I was in the junior ROTC. I was an officer, first lieutenant. When I went to Xavier, I was in the honors class. And next stop was Fordham University in the Bronx, a little different, but a lot easier. College was much easier than Xavier. Going to Xavier prepared me to go to law school. And when I graduated Fordham, I went to New York University Graduate School for half a year. And then I went over to New York Law School, which is different from New York University. That's at on Ward Street. It's very, very.
Oh, okay. I see.
That's a very prestigious law school, also, where Chief Justice Berger was the guest speaker when I graduated from New York Law School. Then I went to the Legal Aid Society, 1976 to 1979, and I got a lot of experience. I would say I had 3,000 cases every year. All right.
Wow.
Handling them at one level or another, and got a lot of trial experience at the Legal Aid Society. Then I became a private lawyer in 1979, and to be quite honest, in my neighborhood where I grew up, Little Italy and the Lower East Side, a lot of people would get into trouble. So I didn't have to look very far to find clients. I also, when I left the Legal Aid Society, I engaged as an 18B lawyer. That means I accept court assignments from the court.
Okay.
Even now, I do that. And, I've had thousands and thousands of cases of poor people that I represented on behalf of, the court system. I get appointed. I'm on the homicide panel for New York City. So, but, the organized crime cases came from where I lived. And at the start, I always had the little guy. I had not the biggest guy. I had the little guy. And through all those cases, I met many of the lawyers that you mentioned to me in our private conversations. I did a lot of trials with David Breitbart, with Jay Goldberg, with Jimmy LaRosa, who is like one of my favorite
great attorneys.
Jerry Shargell.
Yes.
These Gus Newman, these were the giants of our profession. And, I was lucky enough to work with them because people in the case would know me and trust me and want me on the case somewhere. And one of the first big cases I got was the commission case.
Yes.
And I
love to hear about that, please.
I represented a gentleman by the name of Steve Canone. His nickname was Stevie Beef. And he was one of the many people who were arrested in the commission case. I knew Carmine Persico before that, but I developed a close relationship as a result of being one of the lawyers in the commission case. Carmine represented himself in that case. And my client, Mr. Canone, he died during the course of the case. So I was never on the trial, but I did, in fact, have a lot of experience with the commission case from the beginning and to the end. And in fact, getting back to the commission case, I got back into that case with Carmine Persico at the end of his life when he was about He must have been about 80 years old when Anthony DiPietro and I started working on his case. And we spent 5 years trying to develop our motions to get him out on the evidence that he was actually innocent, right?
Yeah.
Then that didn't work. And we tried to get him out on compassionate release because he was very, very sick and he was going to die. And they didn't care. But no matter what we tried with Carmine Persico, they wanted him to die in jail. And that's the viciousness of this system. And what amazed me the most is that when we were arguing in Carmine, while Carmine was 85 years old, the prosecutors were all young people who didn't know about the commission case, who didn't know about the war on organized crime. So you would think that they would be less vicious than the original prosecutors. But no, it's like this. Someone once said to me, when the government puts a big red X on your file, that means that you're never getting out of prison ever. And I think that's what happened to Carmine Persico, and a lot of people like him. We actually showed evidence that the government had hid substantial exculpatory evidence for 30 years that might have been able to allow Carmine Persico to exonerate himself. You got to understand, Carmine Persico was in jail during the whole course of the alleged conduct in the commission case. He was in jail, so you might think, oh, he's going to walk away. But the government had a theory, which was approved by the courts, that he is vicariously responsible because he is the boss of the family, okay? And because of that, he's responsible for everything that happens, even if no one advises him of it. Believe me, that's the law. So the whole issue was whether he's the boss. And 30 years after he was convicted, we find FBI documents which show that 2 FBI agents and Scarpa, all right?
Scarpa, yep.
Woman, they said 3 other individuals were the so-called boss of the family, okay? Yep. So that didn't impress the judge at all. It was like, oh, no, this guy's been convicted. This guy's had his appeal. He's a terrible man. The judge gave him 100 years and he should die in jail. And that was the end of, of Carmine's not guilty, right? And you go to, he was also eligible under the law. You won't believe this one. Carmine Persico was eligible under the law for 30-year mandatory parole. That means he was convicted. The law said when you're in jail for 30 years, you must be released, okay? Unless you do something wrong in jail or they could prove that you're committing crimes, okay?
Right.
So Carmine was in jail for 32 years, and we finally get our hearing 2 years over the date. And when we get into the courtroom at the prison, the hearing room, the hearing officer, almost with tears in his eyes, says to us, I'm sorry, but this case has been postponed. That was in 2017. Wait. Yeah. 2017, August 2nd, 2017. And so we say postponed until when? And he says postponed to August 2nd, 2051. And we went, what? Carmine will be 116 then. I'll be like 92. And they said that because he was sentenced to consecutive 20-year sentences, that he was not eligible for 30 years parole.
Oh, my gosh.
Then Carmine gets sicker and sick, and we try to get him out on compassionate release, and they let him die. Well, 2 days before he died, they transferred him to the hospital, and he died shackled in a hospital bed. It's disgusting. Terrible. Like, when is enough enough? The guy was in jail for the entirety of the commission case.
Yes, he was.
There's no way that he actually participated.
And Matthew, just about Carmine Persico, I did a show on him about 2 years ago, and the government tried to say that he was an informant. They put out this report, but I checked the report, and they used, I believe it was Scarpa's number, and put it on his case file.
You know what happened is a very disingenuous thing that a lawyer did. I don't even want to mention his name because it makes me vomit. There was a government report from 30, 40 years ago called High Echelon Informants. Okay.
Yes.
And they had a lot of people on the left side of the page Carmine Persico, Emilio Delacroce,
Yes.
many other famous people who are accused of being in organized crime. The cream of the crop, you might say, are on the left side. And on the right side is an informant number. That informant number was the informant number of Greg Scarpa. So
Yes.
Greg Scarpa was a high-level informant investigating them. And some lawyer turned this around, and the government didn't stop it and said, oh, this shows that Carmine Persico was an informant. Well, I have to say, I'm very proud of myself and Anthony DiPietro, because Carmine was dead, okay? Our obligation to him was over as lawyers. But as friends, we went on the internet and we denounced what they were saying about Carmine, and we got everybody who wrote that Carmine was an informant to reverse themselves, and we got Jerry Capisi of the Gangland News to write a big article saying how right we are, and he had all the papers. We gave him all the papers, the very papers that they accused Carmine of cooperating of because of them. These are the papers that proved it was impossible. It was stupid.
Right.
It was just damn stupid. And, calling Carmine Persico a cooperator is like saying that George Washington was an English spy.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just had to get that in there. It's funny because when I pulled that up and I seen that these guys all had the same number, I'm like, wow.
Isn't it amazing? Like,
yeah, I believe it's 34 was the number, by the way.
I mean, luckily, one of the lawyers, Anthony, he knew Scarpa's number by heart. And he said, don't you see? You know whose number that is? It's not individual numbers for these guys. The number is Scarpa's number.
Yeah.
He's the informant.
And one of the big magazines ran with the story and came out. And
they love to do it. The media doesn't care. That's why I started my podcast, A View from Mulberry Street. And the media just doesn't care. And nobody's got the guts to say the things that I say. Say, oh boy, Matt's saying the mafia is good, the government's bad. Well, I'm not exactly saying that. I'm saying there's a lot wrong with our criminal justice system. And I don't want you to let my clients go. I just want a fair shake. I want a fair trial. I want my clients to be investigated the same way everybody's investigated. People think, normal people like yourself, you think that when a crime is committed, the police or the FBI investigate the facts, they find the suspect and turn that evidence over to the prosecutor. But don't work that way in organized crime cases. They start with the guy who they're targeting, and they try to find the crime to match him, all right? No matter how far-fetched it might be, no matter how far removed he may be from the crime, if they could link their target to the crime, they indict him, okay? And that's wrong. I don't think anyone should be targeted like that. Imagine the FBI creating a James Proctor squad or a Lee Cole squad. How would you feel about that? What? If there are 3 FBI agents assigned to arrest you and you're not doing anything, I mean, what the heck is going on over here? And then once they arrest them, their bail situation is different. The trials are different. The way they're sentenced is different. The way they're treated in prison is different. The way they're released is different. Their supervised release is different. Everything's different about these guys, okay? And what I'm saying in my podcast, A View from Mulberry Street, given a lot of examples of how this occurs, and no one cares about it. And because the public don't care about it happening to them, it's happening to everyone now. The whole
it is
broken down.
It's everywhere.
And so you're talking about, and one of the things when we talk about these type of alleged crimes, we're what we're referring to as well related is RICO. So the RICO Act, was put into law in early 70s, and it took over 10 to 15 years before the government even knew what to do with RICO, because they must have had some concerns that can RICO actually be allowed?
No one wanted to use it. The RICO Act was written and passed in 1970, and Rudy Giuliani was the person, not surprisingly, who decided he was going to use it. And He used it in a lot of cases. You got to understand, prior to RICO, if you're accused of a crime, you have to go on trial for each crime separately. Okay?
Sure.
Under the RICO law, they could put together 2, 3, 4, 5 different crimes that have nothing to do with each other. All right.
Mm-hmm.
And try you all together. All right. How are you going to win? And if they say that you're part of a criminal enterprise, which could be, the Mozzarella family, if they say that, they could not only charge you with numerous crimes, but they could put you together with a lot of people, some of whom you don't know, and say you're all part of the enterprise and you're all going to be tried together. Now, how is a jury going to ever look at you fairly if they put you together with so many people who've committed crimes and they put you on trial for so many crimes in one shot? I mean, it's impossible for a jury to believe that you could be not guilty of everything. And that's what RICO is. Then it enables them to give you 20 years on top of whatever the sentence would be.
Yeah, it's disgusting to me, because the thing is, you could be a so-called boss, and so you're going to tell me that what everything that's going on. Like, even look at John Gotti and the Sammy Gravano. Sammy Gravano was doing a lot of stuff that John Gotti, the so-called boss, he didn't know what was going on. So why are they going to put
the
him
same?
in?
The same for Vic Amuso and Gas Pipe Casso. Gas Pipe Casso was doing all the damage. All right.
Yes.
And he didn't tell Vic Amuso about everything. Instead, he became an informant and blamed everything on Vic Amuso. And so Vic Amuso looks like a monster when he didn't. Vic Amuso, I can tell you for a fact that a lot of the murders that he was accused of, he read about in the newspapers for the first time in the morning and said, oh my God, this is the truth. I mean, that's inside information. Read about it. The next day, didn't know anything about it. Who could believe this? All right. Joe Messino once told me, he said, the boss is the last to know.
Mm-hmm. And that's true.
When something goes wrong, the boss is the last to know.
Yep.
So it's out of control.
And Matthew, tell us some of your favorite so-called gangsters that when you met them, they just surprised you. They were different than what you could imagine in your head.
I can't say that I was surprised that Carmine Persico was the smartest human being that I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
When you want to classify someone as a gangster and, say, oh, Matt, are you saying Carmine's the smartest gangster that you ever met? Well, I don't know what you want to call. He's the smartest man I've ever met, and perceptive and kind, and was nice to me, advised me about my personal life. John Gotti has a very gruff exterior, and I can't say that John Gotti and I were friends, that I went to his house and he went to mine. No. But I met him many, many times. I started off in prison visiting someone else when I met John, and John and I loved to talk about things. And when he got out of prison, and we would meet by accident many, many times, the night my daughter was born, John was having dinner in a place called Il Gordonetto. And that was right near Lenox Hill Hospital. And I happened to be in the restaurant. I had a jogging suit on and a beard, and, it was all messed up. And John was all dressed up with all his friends. And he invited me to come and eat with him. He said, you get over here. He said, get up. Where are you going? He said, you keep walking by me. He said, why? You don't like me? I said, John, I don't want to interrupt you. And he said, you're not interrupting me. He said, you sit down right here. He said, you have dinner. I sat down and had a drink. But I've seen the lighter side of all these guys. You've said what most people say. Oh, Tommy Karate, he is a serial killer. Tommy, to me, is the most respectful guy, courteous guy, soft-spoken guy, and someone that I would never think would hurt somebody precipitously. Like, you stepped on my shoe, I'm going to kill you. I think, Tommy is a little bit more serious than that. I don't think he's a serial killer who enjoyed hurting people. But on the other hand, he was a guy who didn't take any guff from anyone.
And here's a question that you can give an answer to, because it seems to be the big thing on YouTube now. And John Gotti destroyed the mafia.
Listen, all the cooperators destroyed whatever. Okay, cooperation, the RICO law made people scared. Okay, because now
Yes.
you're not going to get 5 or 6 years. You're going to get 50 years. Okay, and you're not going to get 10 years for murder. You're going to get life without parole, no chance of parole, and that was very destructive. And then you had all these cooperators who were illegal millionaires, multimillionaires, and they're so rich that they didn't want to give up their money. They couldn't live without their money. They can't live without them, those dirty millions. And the government said to them, you can keep your dirty money. You don't have to go to jail. Tell us what you want to hear. And then you had all the cooperation.
And it doesn't matter if it's lies either.
Yeah, of course it doesn't matter. And the government doesn't care. That's what hurts. The government should care. But in organized crime cases, they do not care.
Did John Gotti have any opportunity to become an informant, do you think?
Well, I could tell you one thing. In Tommy Karatte's case, when they arrested Tommy Karate, first of all, they stopped this car like with 10 cars and so many agents, DEA, FBI, New York City Police Department, and they actually smashed Tommy's head into his car numerous times. He was bleeding profusely. They didn't have the guts to do that until he was shackled, hands and feet. And then they turned Tommy around. This is a true story. And they said to him, Tommy, we've got you on 9 murders and more. All of that could go away in a second. All you have to do is tell us. We know it's true. You have to tell us that John Gotti is the Willie Boy Johnson murder. You have to tell us that John Gotti is behind the Willie Boy Johnson murder. And, Tommy refused. I don't think that they ever would have had the guts to ask John Gotti to be a rat. And I'm sorry, Sammy's accusation that John wanted him to be a stooge for him, I just don't see that happening, because long before John Gotti was accused of being a boss or member of organized crime, long before that, he was a jailhouse guy. He's not afraid of prison.
No.
He's not afraid of prison. He wasn't afraid of prison.
And James and I did a comparison between Al Capone and between John Gotti. They both had 5-year reigns. People don't realize that Al Capone, by the time he was 32, was out of the mafia in prison. Yeah. And he started young. These guys have identical careers, except John Gotti was on the street a lot longer. Yeah. And it's like Capone's looked at like some kind of legendary gangster, but he didn't do nearly what John Gotti did.
John did a lot of time. And another thing about John, when he was sick in prison, he had this thing, a pain in his jaw, and they gave him aspirin. That's a big thing on my podcast. They gave Vito Genovese aspirin, and he died. They gave John Gotti aspirin, and he died. And there's so many more that they gave them aspirin and said, this is the cure. So, when John didn't know he had cancer, but they were giving him aspirin. Then eventually they find out he's got cancer. Oh, yeah, they send him to the hospital. But, at the beginning, they didn't want to treat him. And he told his lawyers, I don't want you to do anything to beg them to get me any kind of special treatment. I'd rather die in jail than give them the satisfaction. Because they actually waited so long to treat John Gotti that's how he died in jail. I mean, if he were out on the street, the ailment he had could easily have been managed and cured or whatever. And they just let it go too long. They don't care.
No, they don't. And, the thing is, regarding how the government does stuff, I did want to bring up one other guy, and it's Joe Bonanno. You had an interesting story about him. So this again, could you tell the story about him and how and what they tried to make him do from Arizona?
When we were talking privately, you're talking about Joe Bonanno's book. I forget the name of it. Man of Honor. Son's book. I don't like his son. Didn't like his
Yeah.
son. He's dead now.
Right.
He wrote a book called Honor Thy Father. Real little book. Every book that Bill Bonanno wrote was BS.
Right.
Anyhow, so Joe Bonanno writes this book. He's in retirement. He retired back in the 60s. And I don't know when this book was written, man of honor. But that's the basis for Rudy Giuliani creating the commission case. Okay. And so they subpoena Joe Bonanno to be a witness at the commission trial. And he claims that he's too sick to travel from Arizona to New York. So what does the government do? They move the Southern District of New York to Arizona. All the prosecutors, the court reporters, the judge, and all the lawyers convene in Arizona for this hearing. And at the beginning of it, they say the Southern District of New York is now in session. And that's how powerful the government is. And, Joe Bonanno was called as a witness. And Rudy kept showing him that book, that cover, the book itself, and putting it in Joe Bonanno's face. And Joe Bonanno kept looking through the book as if there is no book. And he kept saying to Rudy in his thick Italian accent, what book, what book, what book? Now, I had met Joe Bonanno when I was a young boy. I was about 14 years old. And so he knew who I was. And at one of the breaks, he called me over and he said, Matt, I'd like to ask you, what do you think is going to happen to me today? And I said to him, I said, Joe, if you don't talk, and I know you're not going to talk, you're going to go to jail until the trial is over. They could hold you as a witness and just keep you there. He said, how long do you think the trial is going to be? I said, about a year. He said, oh, boy. So he got his money out of his pocket and gave it to his grandson or his granddaughter and took his watch. And he said, I'm not coming home tonight. And then Joe turned to me and he said, the defendants in the case were supposed to be the heads of organized crime. And so Joe said to me, when you get back to New York, he said, tell the guys in New York, Mr. Joe is no rat. He says, that book, he said, I didn't write that book. He said, my son made somebody write it for me. But he said, but I authorized it. He said, I made a big mistake. He said, but I felt like I wasn't accusing anyone of a crime or giving up any secrets. He said, but it was a big mistake. He said, but you told the guys, Mr. Joe's going to jail. Don't think I'm bad. I'm not bad. I said, don't worry about it. And it was an interesting experience.
Well, I got two people I want to ask you about, and you can give me your opinion of them. And I know you don't have to slander them, but it seems like you kind of have a dislike for Rudolph Giuliani.
I have to say this about Rudy. He was a very vicious prosecutor, and he went above and beyond the scope of what a prosecutor can do. In fact, now I see that he's getting framed, and I'm not enjoying it, but I'm saying to myself, Rudy's going to get a dose of his own medicine, but he
exactly.
Don't do it. Okay. As a prosecutor, I didn't like him. I met him on the commission case and other cases, but I did like him as the mayor of New York. And I did get to meet him because I was in an organization called the Community Mayors. And what we did was entertain severely handicapped kids on a massive scale. We'd take them to the circus, take them to the Christmas party at Kennedy Airport, and many, many other things. And Rudy Giuliani used to participate in that very actively and effectively. So I have to say I have mixed feelings about Rudy. He was a terrible prosecutor. I mean, he overstepped his bounds. He's more than overzealous. But, as a mayor, I think he was a good mayor.
Yeah, and I'm going to put up listen, you got this gallery here. Is there anybody that you didn't meet in New York?
Well, met a lot of people in life, and did a lot of, I wouldn't say public service, but I was in the public service, arena of meeting all our politicians and stuff, doing charity work and stuff like that. They'll never say that when Matthew Mary dies. They'll never talk about the stuff you're showing right now. They'll say mob lawyer dies, and that's it. You're just a mob lawyer, and you'll never be anything else. But yeah, I met a lot of people in public life, and it was very. I lived a very well-rounded life. You see me and George Steinbrenner there. That's one of the best moments that I had, meeting George and kidding around with him.
Now, Matthew, my father had a he was running the you remember the Good Humor push carts in New York City?
Yes.
Well, he was running them, and
Wow.
then Ed Koch passed something at that time to kind of shut them down. My father had such a disdain for Ed Koch
Yeah.
because of he had to go to court with him a couple times. The battle he was trying to hurt these vendors.
Terrible.
What is your opinion?
How could you do something wrong to the Good Humor man? My God.
Mm-hmm.
He was favoring the restaurants and taking it out on the Good Humor guys, and these were just hardworking. You know, this Good Humor was down. You remember where the Hell's Angels headquarters used to be down there in the Lower East Side?
4th Street.
I think it was 2nd Avenue or 3rd Avenue. They had the whole street.
They were on 4th Street between 2nd Avenue and 3rd Avenue.
Yes, and my father worked there. He was very friendly with the Hell's Angels, and for 10 years, they loved my father. When they did their premiere, they did the premiere at Studio 54 of the movie. They invited him, and he had a weird relationship with them, but it was the safest block in New York.
Yeah. You know, the Hells Angels, I had some experience with them too when I was a young man. And yeah, they could be pretty nasty when they got into a fight, but they weren't looking for a fight. You know,
Right.
they could fight a fight. But they weren't looking for a fight. And it's funny that the Hells Angels, whenever they would go into any of these so-called organized crime places, like a lot of times they would be told, you know, you could stay here all day, but you can't come here at night because you scare the people. And they would go, okay, that's good.
Well, you know, the Hell's Angels kids used to run to my father's place, and they'd be out front, and my father would be giving them popsicles and stuff. And one of the head of the Hell's Angels at that time, his name was Sandy, and his son fell down an elevator shaft when he was running across the top of the buildings. And my father did a lot for him, went to the hospital, and he lost a lot of his thoughts. He never was the same again. But they treated him so good for that, and I'll never forget.
They're a good bunch. They're a good bunch of guys. In fact, you know, my mother-in-law used to live out in Oklahoma, and she ran a restaurant out there, and she every year there was a convention of the Hells Angels, and they would pass through her town.
Right.
And she said, I love them as customers. I wanted them to come in like for 2-3 days, just stay here, day and night, stay here.
They'd spend money.
I'm going to give you another a big time character in New York, and I want your opinion of him.
Curtis Lewa. I know Curtis too well.
What is your opinion of him?
Well, it's hard. You know, I like Curtis a lot. You know, he's an entertainer first and foremost. He's a very sensitive individual.
Yeah.
He's a very intelligent man. I mean, you might not perceive that from his radio show, but he knows a lot about all the subjects he's talking about. He's very concerned for the city, really. And, you know, I told him when he ran for mayor, I told him, you know, Curtis, a lot of people think you're a crackpot. I said, you have to show your serious side, you know, how serious you are. And he is a very serious man. He's an unpredictable man. I know that he rubs a lot of people wrong, and a lot of people I know hate him. Like they say, how could Curtis be your friend? Why is Curtis your friend? And I don't know. Curtis is my friend. I like him. And, you know, Curtis is one of the guys, he, along with Frank Morano, got me on radio. And, you know, I got on Curtis's show often, and I did a lot of, you know, pieces for him. And one time I was his co-host, and Frank Morano's another guy, knows all about radio, and did a lot of appearances on the Joe Piscopo show, all about politics. No war, no mob lawyer. Oh, no. But, you know, at one point, I just got to the point like where I felt before I die, I better do this show, A View from Mulberry Street. And we've got 35 episodes up there on YouTube. YouTube is the place to go to see that show. And it's called A View from Mulberry Street.
And it's running right below this, people. And I'm going to put your link underneath the show when it's done.
And
Please go subscribe.
Right now, we're at a hiatus, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do with the show, whether we're going to change the format, whether we're going to transition it into something like a Fox News program or a streaming program, or maybe we're going to do some spin-offs and not just talk about organized crime in the courts, talk about current events. I just don't know yet. Neil Healy is my partner. He went to Xavier High School with me years ago, and Neil's a big Hollywood guy, and so we're rethinking what our next step is. But we already got those 35 episodes up on YouTube, A View from Mulberry Street. So I'd like your listeners, if they like this,
please,
if they like this interview, they'll like the podcast, because I really go into a lot of stuff.
Well, you're a dangerous man, because I cannot picture anybody going into a restaurant, sitting down with you, and not wanting to sit there 5 hours and talk to you.
Boy, I love to talk, and people love to talk to me.
Yeah, but talking and really knowing is too. A lot of people love to talk, but I mean, you talk. You have all the evidence in the world. This is who you are. These are the people I knew, and not many people can say that.
And Lee, I believe in telling the truth, and if you try to tell the truth, I mean, I can't tell the truth all the time when I'm in court. I mean, I can't reveal any secrets.
You can't reveal,
But most of the time, when I talk to my adversaries, I make them understand that I understand them, and I understand what they want, and they've got to understand what I want. I just want to be treated fairly. You know what I mean? And I think people appreciate that, and they like that, and they respect that. And I think respect is the most important word in the English language, and the most important thing that you could have or you can give.
I'm going to let my partner, James, being that he worked so hard on getting you on here, ask you the last question and close this great interview out.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just one question, kind of it. Don't go too, because you probably work with him, but because I'm just curious, what's your thoughts on Bruce Cutler? He's such a, he's very voluptuous in court, eccentric in court. Yeah.
I knew Bruce when he was an assistant district attorney, and he was a great guy. And then I met him when he was working for Barry Slotnick, and then he split up with Barry Slotnick. He became John Gotti's lawyer. I think he did a job on the John Gotti cases that no one could do. He had a lot of help. He had Jerry Shawgell and other lawyers, but Bruce had the guts to really treat that case the way it had to be treated. And that was like war. It was war. If you read John Gleason's book, who was the prosecutor, you could see that's what it was. It was a war. And Bruce Cutler has the guts to go into the courtroom and act like he's on the street. He's just not afraid. And I always respected Bruce for that. And I don't think he got enough credit in life after the Gotti cases from other people. It seems that people don't want to associate themselves with Gotti. And so Bruce wasn't, on the scene as much as he should have been. Bruce should have been in every major case. Exactly. He earned that.
Okay. Do you think that the government fairly took him out of that trial? Do you think they had a legitimate cause?
He did it on purpose, and it was wrong. And I think it was illegal, and it was vicious. A prostitution of their power.
Do you think if Cutler didn't get taken off that trial, Gotti gets off?
I think so.
Really?
I think, I loved Al Krieger. Al Krieger is one of the most revered lawyers in America. Actually, he's my mentor. But Al was a little old at the time. I don't think Al was as aggressive as Bruce would have been. And you're representing John Gotti. You have to be aggressive, because
Cutler had the ability to get that relationship with the jury.
Yeah. Hey, listen, the jurors understand very quickly that Bruce is fighting a battle there, life and death.
He was like a typical New York street guy.
Absolutely. No two ways about that. Bruce is a
Matthew,
tough
we
guy.
loved having you here, man.
Okay.
We appreciate this.
My
And,
pleasure being here, and I hope we'll be in touch again.
We will be. I'll call you every week to come in and do a weekly special.
Good. Who knows?
Yeah, no, but you'll probably start charging us by the hour, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, everyone,
I could
please
charge
go
legal
to
fees for doing these podcasts. That would be great.
yeah, yeah. But everyone, please go to View from Mulberry Street, a View from Mulberry Street, and we will put the link there. We'll make sure the link's there. Yeah, I'll tell you, it's my favorite channel or YouTube channel out there because of that. Yeah, you talk about mafia, but you talk about so many other subjects, and it's very intellectual. It's very interesting, and I'm telling you, those 35 episodes are just outstanding. All 35.
And James, you know, I'm not computer oriented, but there's one when you go to not our website, when you go to YouTube and you try to get, there's one link that lists all the programs right in front of you. I wish I knew how to send that to you, but there's one
playlist.
Link, a playlist of everything. I think when you get the homepage on YouTube, then you press videos, and it shows everything, like all 35 shows.
Yeah, I could help you with that. That's not
right.
hard to do. So I'll definitely do that after this.
And James, you make sure you charge them by the hour.
I'm sure you charge a higher rate than I do.
For future stuff. Yeah, let me know about it. I know we talked about something, and we got to follow up on that.
Yep, sounds good. We will definitely.
Okay.
So Matt,
all right.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. I know your time is very valuable.
I really enjoyed our time together today.
Well, we try to ask people questions that they usually wouldn't be asked. So, you know, that's why we were all over the place. There's 1,000 other questions I can ask you, I'm sure.
Okay.
And we had to get Gotti in there. That was important to us and other certain people like that meant everything. And the Gotti trials were so big. I mean, on the junior and senior, you know, and we appreciate you going over them with us.
Okay.
Well, you take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. I'm going to sign off now.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Now that, James, was a really interesting show.
Well, I'm glad because, you know, this has been something we've been working on for about 6 months to get together. You know, like I said, this is the first time I've never been nervous coming into an interview until Matthew Mary. But once he got on, he's very easy to talk to. He's good at how he delivers, so you don't have to do much.
I know that you were worried because you kept saying it to me, and I remember saying to you, we're not going to have to do much.
And you're right.
There's certain guys you bring on like Matthew Murray that you do not have to do much. They're like this encyclopedia. They've had a brilliant life, and he didn't badmouth it. Like he had his differences with Giuliani. He didn't badmouth him. He said, I didn't like him as a prosecutor, but I liked him as a mayor.
Yes.
A lot of people say that.
Yeah, and I've heard that a lot, you know, that even people that don't like Giuliani, you know, in the Trump era, they liked him as a mayor. You know, he did, you know, a good job as mayor for a lot of people. So, you know, he cleaned up the city. I know that.
And people, we work very hard on this show, and please subscribe, hit the like button and the reminder bell. We'd really appreciate it. And we're going to have more interviews like this. Yes. And we're going to probably have another one like this, maybe within a week or so, but we're going to try to get people that know what you're talking about. When we first went in a new direction and we got James, when we did Chicali, people have to understand that's not who we're going to be. Right. We're not going to be pro rat or pro informant. We're just going to do the best shows we can and try to put up the best people we can. And it's the people's job here to whether they believe, like if I bring up a Dominic Chicali or anybody, it's their job to believe them or not. All we're going to do is ask them questions and work with them a little bit. That's it.
Yeah, and we'll always ask we weren't asked the tough questions. We weren't asked those questions that are, reasons for why maybe certain things happen. And so, if someone isn't willing to be open about that, we won't have them come on. It's just the way it is. And so, for me, um, I enjoy when we're able to interview people like this. That this guy is very big and one of the top trial lawyers for organized crime, and so he's very much someone I look up to be honest.
Now all we got to do is get Bruce Cutler.
Yeah, yeah, he's still alive. So
Yes, he is. Okay, James, thank you very much. I appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Everybody, please, like I said, please subscribe, hit the like button and the reminder bell. And we're going to continue giving you top quality stuff like this. Thank you.
Thank you.